This movie covers subtopic 1.5, Humans and Pollution, under the main topic of ESS Topic 1, Foundations of Environmental Systems and Societies. Significant idea number 1 from this subtopic. Pollution is a highly diverse phenomenon of human disturbance in ecosystems. Let's define pollution. Pollution is the addition of a substance or an agent to an environment by human activity at a rate greater than that at which it can be rendered harmless by the environment, and which has an appreciable effect on organisms in the environment. Pollutants may be in the form of organic or inorganic substances, may be in the form of light, sound, heat energy, or biological agents or invasive species. And these pollutants derive from a wide range of human activities, including the combustion of fossil fuels. Pollution may be non-point or point source. It may be persistent or biodegradable. And pollution may be acute or chronic. Let's begin by defining these different terms. Non-point pollution generally results from land runoff, precipitation, atmospheric deposition, drainage, seepage or hydrological modification, and it comes from many diffuse sources. Following a heavy rainstorm, for example, water will flow across a parking lot and pick up oil left by cars driving and parking on the asphalt. When you see rainbow-colored sheen on water like this flowing across the surface of a road or parking lot, you are actually looking at non-point source pollution. This runoff then runs over the edge of the parking lot, and most likely it eventually empties into a stream. The water flows downstream into a larger stream, and then into a lake, a river, or ocean. The pollutants in this runoff can be quite harmful, and their sources numerous. We usually cannot point to one discrete location of a non-point source pollution, like we can with a discharge pipe or a factory. Here is an image depicting this process. Once again, rainfall or snowmelt moving over and through the ground. As the runoff moves, it picks up and carries away natural and human-made pollutants, finally depositing them into lakes, rivers, wetlands, coastal waters, and groundwaters. Non-point pollution can include excess fertilizers, herbicides, and insecticides from agricultural lands and residential areas. It can include oil, grease, and toxic chemicals from urban runoff and energy production. It can include sediment from improperly managed construction sites, crop and forest lands, and eroding stream banks. It can be salt from irrigation practices or acid drainage from abandoned mines. It can even be bacteria and nutrients from livestock, pet wastes, and faulty septic systems. It can also be atmospheric deposition. Point source pollution is defined by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, as any single identifiable source of pollution from which pollutants are discharged, such as a pipe. This image shows a point source of industrial pollution along the Calumet River. Factories and sewage treatment plants are two common types of point sources. Factories, including oil refineries, pulp and paper mills, and chemical and electronics and automobile manufacturers, typically release one or more pollutants in their discharged waters, called effluents. Some factories discharge their effluents directly into a water body. Others treat it themselves before it is released, and still others send their wastes to sewage treatment plants for treatment. Sewage treatment plants treat human wastes and send the treated effluent to a stream or river. Here, a factory disposes of its wastes into a local body of water. And here, a ship is disposing of its pollution directly into the ocean. Persistent pollution. Persistent organic pollutants, or POPs, are chemical substances that persist in the environment, accumulate in the food web, and pose a risk of adverse effects on humans and wildlife. This figure shows a satellite image of the passage of a cloud of dust, see it here, across the Pacific Ocean to North America. This cloud dust was raised by a storm in Asia in April of 2001. Again, it's carrying POPs all around the world. POPs include intentionally produced chemicals currently or once used in agriculture, disease control, manufacturing, or industrial processes. Examples include PCBs, which have been useful in a variety of industrial applications like electronic transformers and large capacitors, and as hydraulic and heat exchange fluids, and as additives to paint and lubricants. And DDT, which you've well heard of, which is still used to control mosquitoes that carry malaria in some parts of the world. In this image, you see PCP contamination high in the Housatonic River and New Bedford Harbor in Massachusetts. How high is this? According to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, this is the highest concentration of PCBs ever documented in a marine environment. Furthermore, unintentionally produced chemicals such as dioxins that result from some industrial processes and from combustion, for example, municipal and medical waste incineration and backyard burning of trash. These substances are highly stable and therefore non-degradable, hence persistent in the environment. They can be transported over long distances and accumulate in the environment. POPs cause problems because they are stored in the fatty tissues and organs of animals, where they can have toxic effects. For example, they can disrupt the endocrine system, cause cancer or genetic defects, and weaken the immune system. The highest concentration of POPs are generally found in marine mammals and humans, both of which are at the top of the food chain. This is, of course, the result of bioaccumulation and biomagnification in the food chain. The process illustrated here relates to polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, but the same process holds true for all POPs. Each level higher up on the food chain consumes multiple contaminated organisms lower on the food chain. As a result, a higher concentration of the toxin exists in organisms higher on the food chain. This is called biomagnification and has been long recognized as an environmental problem. Biodegradable pollutants do not persist in the environment and can be broken down into simpler, harmless substances in nature over time by microorganisms like certain bacteria or by physical processes like light or heat. Biodegradable pollutants include, but are not limited to, domestic waste or garbage, urine, fecal matter, sewage, agricultural residues, paper, wood, cloth, cattle dung, animal bones, leather, wool, vegetable stuff, or plants. They are all biodegradable pollutants. Acute pollution. This is where large amounts of a pollutant are released, causing a lot of immediate harm. Examples of acute pollution include oil spills. We've had 11 major maritime oil spills throughout the years. Pictured here is the 1991 Gulf War oil spill, the largest oil spill of all time to that point, with over 2 million barrels of oil being dumped into the Persian Gulf. The Bhopal disaster of 1984 is considered the world's worst industrial disaster, with the Union Carbide pesticide plant releasing 40 tons of methyl isocyanate gas into the community. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster is also an example of acute pollution event. Chronic pollution results from long-term release of a pollutant, but in small amounts. Pictured here is the classic example of chronic air pollution in Beijing, China. Another infamous example is that of the Minamata disease, which was first discovered in Minamata City in Japan. It was caused by the release of methylmercury in the industrial wastewater from the Chiso Minamata Corporation's chemical factory, which continued from 1932 to 1968. This highly toxic chemical bioaccumulated in shellfish and fish in Minamata Bay, which was then eaten by local people and resulted in mercury poisoning, while cat, dog, pig, and human deaths continued over more than 30 years. The government and company did little to prevent the pollution. Pollutants may be primary, which are active on emission, or secondary, arising from primary pollutants undergoing physical or chemical change. Stop the movie and study this slide to gain an understanding of the common primary and secondary pollutants. On the left, you see pollutants that are active on emission, or primary pollutants. On the right, you see pollutants that arise from primary pollutants undergoing physical or chemical change, and these are secondary pollutants. Atmospheric pollution is dealt with in Topic 6. However, here's an example of the production of secondary pollutants from primary pollutants. Ground-level ozone can be formed by chemical reactions between nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, in the presence of sunlight. And this type of ozone can cause irritation to the respiratory tract and eyes, causing chest tightness, coughing, and wheezing, especially amongst those with respiratory and heart problems. It is also damaging air pollutant to plants as it reduces growth and productivity, including food crops. Ozone also affects buildings and building material. Some major sources of pollutants and some of their impacts. We will consider more specifics of these later on and throughout the course. Combustion of fossil fuels yields carbon dioxide, but also sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, photochemical smog, including tropospheric ozone, and perioxyacyl nitrates, called PANs, and volatile organic compounds listed as VOCs in this image. Domestic waste includes food and sewage, waste paper, plastics, glass, tin, and cans. Industrial waste includes heavy metals, fluorides, heat, lead, and acids. Agricultural waste includes nitrates, organic waste, and pesticides. These pollutants are associated with poor air quality, and they negatively impact both human health and the environment. Environmental impacts associated with pollutants that contribute to poor air quality are vast and oftentimes irreversible. Increased acidification and nitrogen in habitats can lead to decreased biodiversity. Increased levels of sulfur dioxide can contribute to the formation of acid rain, and VOCs reacting with other pollutants can lead to the production of ground-level ozone, which decreases plant growth and contributes to global warming. Recent studies based on atmospheric modeling have concluded that air pollutants are not restricted to international borders and therefore are not localized. This means that pollution in one country has the potential to travel and impact greenhouse gas effect in another country, while also increasing the likelihood of extreme weather events. Study this slide in detail and read all the impacts and consequences of these different types of pollutions. You need to be able to construct system diagrams to show the impact of pollutions. For example, recall that system diagrams allow individuals to visualize and understand how processes work and how they might be improved. So here is an example of a systems diagram showing the impact of waste, right? And just recall that the diagram usually depicts the inputs of the process or activity, which includes energy and other resources consumed and raw materials and chemicals used. Usually there's a step-by-step process in flows, decision points on alternate methods direct the consequence of these diagrams, and process outputs, which include products or services, air emissions, noise, odor, radiation, wastewater discharges, solid waste, and hazardous waste, are included. in such diagram. Significant idea number 2. Management strategies can be applied at different levels. You need to be able to evaluate the effectiveness of each of the 3 different levels of intervention with reference to this figure. Stop the movie, read through it, and become familiar with this figure. In this study, comparisons were made between states with and without cash incentives for properly returning beverage containers, both within the United States and Australia. Debris surveys revealed that states with cash incentives had proportionally 40% less littered containers than states without cash incentives. At what stage of the process of pollution is this? What level pollution management does this address? This is at the level of addressing the human activity responsible for producing the pollutant. The data shows that when there's an economic incentive, human activity is altered. People throw less plastic into the waste. The Clean Water Act establishes the basic structure for regulating discharges of pollutants into the waters of the United States and regulating quality standards for surface waters. The basis of the CWA was enacted in 1948 and was called the Federal Water Pollution Control Act, but the act was significantly reorganized and expanded in 1972. The Clean Water Act became the act's common name with amendments in 1972. What level of pollution of management does this address? This is at the level of addressing the release of the pollutant into the environment. The data shows that following legislating and regulating standards of emission, the amount of unfishable waters decreased. This is a photo sequence showing mangrove restoration at Palk Bay, India. What level of pollution management is addressed here? The level of impact of pollution on the ecosystem is observed, and the impact of replanting, restocking lost or depleted populations and communities is evidenced. In 2008, the well of a pond holding 1 billion gallons of toxic coal ash slurry from a huge electrical coal-powered plant owned by the TVA in Kingston, Tennessee, suddenly collapsed. The spill contaminated 300 acres of land and required a massive cleanup project. Dozens of cleanup workers involved in the cleanup have died and hundreds have fallen ill. Coal ash is a waste product of burning coal. Thus, its source is combustion of fossil fuels. Furthermore, we know exactly from where the pollutant came, namely the Kingston Coal Company. Therefore, the coal ash spill was a point source pollutant. This is an aerial photograph of the coal ash spill. If you compare the sheer volume of it, it's 100 times larger than the Exxon Valdez oil spill, in it being 1 billion gallons in all of this coal ash that spilled. And the Tennessee Valley Authority told everyone that this coal ash that was now covering 300 acres was totally safe, and that it posed no harm to the people that live near it or the people that were helping clean it up. 900 people were involved in the cleanup, and it was almost a 6-year project. So it took a long time. 300 acres covered in coal ash, and that was between 30 centimeters deep and 2 meters deep in other areas. So it was a major undertaking. 40 people have died, and more than 300 additional workers have fallen ill with cancer, heart failure, stroke, and lung disease. They blame their illness on the work they did cleaning up the coal ash spill. They even had morning safety meetings during the cleanup process, and the TVA official would stand up in front of the workers and would tell them, don't worry, that they could eat a pound of coal ash a day and they'd be totally fine. But there's TVA documentation that goes back to the 80s that shows that coal ash contains arsenic, lead, and mercury. So it's hugely toxic. But yes, these officials would stand up and tell the workers regularly that the stuff was safe. And they were given no way to clean up themselves. They weren't given any kind of dust mask or respirator. They were just out there working in their jeans and t-shirts and hard hats. The workers, so while the immediate spill was an acute pollutant, right, a whole bunch of toxic stuff was released, the people were exposed over many years to its chronic presence. While the Kingston Company has made an attempt at extracting and removing the pollutant from the ecosystem, it did not have concern for the employees, and as a result are currently facing, in 2019, a lawsuit by people affected from this industrial disaster. Dichloral diphenyl trichloroethane, or DDT, exemplifies a conflict between the utility of a pollutant and its effect on the environment. Recall from topic 1.1, your first exposure to DDT, that there are advantages of it. It is effective and it's cheap. It can increase crop yield as a pesticide. It's also used to fight malaria and can be used to fight lupus. But there are disadvantages. Farm insects became resistant to it, and farmers had to use it at higher and higher concentrations. Thus, DDT started to affect birds, fish, and humans, which resulted in it being banned. However, DDT is still used today. It is sprayed indoors on walls and furniture to kill and repel mosquitoes carrying malaria. It does remain banned for outside use because of its persistence and toxicity. Why do we still continue to use DDT? Well, malaria kills 2.7 million people a year, mostly children under the age of 5. And you'll note that malaria is located in the world primarily in poor areas, and DDT is effective there in combating malaria. Therefore, it continues to be used for public health reasons in malarial control. Here is a very brief summary of the topics we covered in this subtopic 1.5, Humans and Pollution. This ends the movie for IBESS topic 1.5, Humans and Pollution, under the main topic 1 of Foundations in Environmental Systems and Societies. The slides were created by me, Dr. Nina Markham. Images are courtesy of Creative Commons unless otherwise indicated with a citation under the image. If all images on a slide are from the same source, the source is simply cited at the bottom of the slide. Another resource source for you is your IBESS textbook, whether in hardback form or online such as Cognity. Thank you for listening.